When it comes to animatronic dining experiences, the selection is few and far between, and their popularity seems to be fading away more and more as time goes on. But this wasn't always the case, and for several decades they were one of the biggest fads in restaurant and live entertainment history. Without a doubt, the two most iconic that led to this phenomenon was Chuck E. Cheese Pizza Time Theater and Showbiz Pizza Place. But there's more to both restaurants than meets the eye, and the story behind each franchise is full of unexpected origins, drama, betrayal, and a lot of unintentionally horrific animatronics. So let's go back to a much simpler and stranger time with the rise and fall of Showbiz Pizza Place and Chuck E. Cheese Pizza Time Theater. The story begins in a very unlikely time and place in history, with a college freshman by the name of Nolan Bushnell at the University of Utah in the 1960s. You see, Bushnell was pursuing a degree in electrical engineering, and like most universities in the 60s, the college's computer department had a computer game called Space War. It was quite literally the world's first video game, and he found himself absolutely captivated by this innovative piece of technology. But it's at a local amusement park where things really began to take shape, as to put himself through college, in the summers he worked as a ride operator. He eventually worked his way up to manager of the games department, where he oversaw the Midway arcade games. Now, it may seem like a strange analogy, but much like the delicious combination of chocolate and peanut butter that led to the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup, it was the amalgamation of these theme park arcade games and the college's Space War computer game that led to his brilliant idea: video game arcades. He then set forth on making this vision a reality, in which he eventually co-founded the entertainment company Syzygy to produce the first arcade video game in history, Computer Space. Unfortunately, this didn't take the world by storm as he anticipated, more than likely due to the game's complexity and steep learning curve. So he changed the name of his company to Atari, and in 1972 debuted Pong, but this time the results were a bit more optimistic.
Home video games have been a success from the moment a company called Atari launched this basic game, Pong. They're selling like crazy. 300,000 last year, this year 3 million.
The massive success of Pong was the spark that ignited the video game arcade fire, and quickly became one of the fastest growing industries in the country. But despite seeing an avalanche of profits from Pong and the games that followed, realized the real money wasn't in selling the machines, it was securing locations to operate them. The problem was he wanted to avoid competing with the arcades, not to mention the owners he was selling his systems to. So he came up with the idea of a video game arcade using food as a support structure. This would allow him to avoid direct and undesirable competition, and potentially build a brand new franchise of his own. Now, much like the chocolate peanut butter analogy, there were a number of separate inspirations that, when put together, proved to be the perfect combination for this arcade restaurant hybrid. First was realizing that pizza was by far the easiest type of food to, as he put it, not screw up, so Pizza Parlor seemed like the perfect venue. Then, upon visiting a pizza and organ pipes restaurant, which, as strange as it sounds, was a huge fad in the 60s and 70s, he saw there was a demand for live entertainment to go along with the pizza. Another source of inspiration came from a trip to Disneyland with his daughters, where by sheer coincidence, he had applied for a job as an Imagineer straight out of college. But since the company rarely hired recent college graduates, he was repeatedly turned down for the position. Anyway, he was especially impressed with Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room, which also by sheer coincidence was initially going to be an animatronic dinner show. The way he saw it, animatronics would be a fantastic way to entertain patrons as they dined, and he just so happened to have the engineers at his fingertips to figure out a way to go about doing it. The final piece of the pizza puzzle was Country Bear Jamboree, as apparently he was influenced by its wry humor, catchy musical numbers, and wide cast of lovable characters. Even better was how the show appealed to both children and parents. But the Disney theme park inspirations didn't end there, as Bushnell also envisioned the Pizza Parlor arcade with an iconic mascot in the same vein as Mickey Mouse.
Can we count on you?
You can count on me.
Can we count on you?
You can count on me.
Now, despite popular belief, the original intention wasn't to also be a mouse, but a coyote, and the title of the restaurant was going to be Coyote Pizza. Bushnell even purchased what he thought was a coyote costume from an IAAPA trade show, or International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions. However, once the costume was sent back to Atari, they realized it was actually a rat. So it seems he decided to embrace the obvious similarities to Mickey Mouse, as the character was then given the name of Rick Rat, or Ricky Rat, with the title of the restaurant also changed to Ricky Rat's Pizza Time Theater. But Atari's PR agency felt having the word rad in the title of a restaurant probably wasn't the best idea. So the mascot and restaurant was given a new title, the Big Cheese's Pizza Time Theater. Unfortunately, the Marriott hotel chain, for whatever reason, already had a trademark on the name The Big Cheese. So the creative team put their heads together and came up with the name Chuck E. Cheese for the mascot, and the restaurant became Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza Time Theater. But the cigar-smoking rat would also be joined by a handful of other characters, and together they would be known as the Pizza Time Players.
Now, if you're a parent and you've got some kids at home, I think you better pay attention to this story, because before too long, Chuck E. Cheese and his Pizza Time Theater will be a very intimate feature in your life.
On May 17, 1977, the very first Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza Time Theater made its debut in San Jose, California. And while the food itself was criticized as somewhat mediocre, its Atari-centric video game arcade proved to be just as big of a draw as Bushnell had predicted. Top that off with the unique entertainment offerings by way of animatronic performers, and the restaurant was a huge hit with families. So it should come as no surprise that Noah and Bushnell wanted to expand ASAP. But there was just one thing in the way: Warner Communications. You see, just a year prior, Bushnell had sold Atari to Warner Communications for $28 million. In addition to the sale itself, one of his stipulations was that Warner fully fund one Chuck E. Cheese restaurant, which they did, but they simply had no interest in building another. This was a major problem because they legally owned all the intellectual property, such as characters, logos, names, and everything in between. So Bushnell was forced to buy the restaurant and conceptual rights from Warner for $500,000, or just over $2 million today. He then established Pizza Time Theater, Inc., and once again set forth on making his vision a reality.
The company's ultimate aim is to create a cutesy fantasy world in every neighborhood, to bring a mini Disneyland to your doorstep, and of course, to help your children spend a lot more of your money. Dolly Dimples, the singing hippopotamus, is powered by a computer system capable of handling 450 instructions per second. Dolly has a repertoire of more than 20 medleys and a bosom that rises and falls with compressed air.
The second Chuck E. Cheese restaurant opened just a year later, which utilized a former grocery store and was 4 times the size of the first location, making it the largest pizza parlor in the country. New additions included Dolly Dimples the piano-playing hippo, which, quick fun fact, was intended to be for adults due to her somewhat risque dialogue and, bouncing bosom. To deter kids from entering, they even made a sign with the words "especially for mom and dad." However, ultimately it was never posted, and she often entertained children of all ages. The game room was also expanded to become the Fantasy Forest Game Preserve, featuring virtually every popular arcade video game on the market. There were also a number of changes to the Pizza Time Players, adding both new characters and altering the appearance of others.
The Pizza Time Dinner proudly presents
Down by the old
not the new but the old
stream.
not the river but the stream.
The second location also proved to be a major hit with families, and gave Bushnell the confidence to leave Atari and focus solely on his Pizza Time Theater restaurants. He would do this with the help of eager franchisees, and he soon began to add even more locations all over the country. By the end of the next year, there were almost 10 additional Chuck E. Cheese restaurants, and was on track to open 300 more by 1984, and 1,000 by the end of the decade. A major player of this massive expansion was to be Robert Brock, or Bob Brock, the president of Topeka Inn Management. You see, in the years prior, he had already amassed quite the fortune by franchising Holiday Inn locations all over the world, and was drawn to the prospect of getting a slice of the Pizza Time Theater profits. Don't worry, I'll keep the pizza puns to a bare minimum. So in 1979, Bob Brock signed a $200 million co-development contract with Noah Bushnell, and became an official partner of Pizza Time Theaters, Inc. To keep it simple, this gave him exclusive rights to franchise his own Chuck E. Cheese locations in 16 states all across the country. But as a way to supervise these restaurants, Brock formed a subdivision of Pizza Time Theaters within his own company, Pizza Showbiz. However, this unintentionally set the stage for turning what began as the beginning of a beautiful partnership into a bitter pizza parlor rivalry for the ages.
Aaron had the idea to use animated characters for advertising purposes, and Willie is the first to do so, and with no limit to his vocabulary.
He's got a computer inside. The computer selects from various numbers of messages which he is capable of producing. So it's pretty random. You never know what he's going to say next.
Enter the founder of creative engineering, Aaron Fechter, a young inventor who specialized in mechanical figures. You see, beginning in 1977, he began showcasing his animatronics at the Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions, the same trade show mentioned earlier. First were a number of standalone figures, such as Willie the Rabbit, Friendly Freddy, and Count Dracula. This led to animatronic ensembles, such as the Confederate Critter Show that was sold to Magic World, and the totally not a ripoff of Disney's Country Bear Jamboree, Bear Country Jubilee. Now at one of these early trade shows, he was approached by Nolan Bushnell, the same year he purchased the coyote but not really a coyote costume. As it turns out, Bushnell wanted to purchase Aaron Fechter's animatronics for his in-development pizza parlor, but out of fear of Atari reverse engineering his creations and putting him out of business, he politely declined. At the next year's convention, Aaron Fechter displayed even more elaborate animatronics, this time featuring a band/comedy ensemble known as the Wolfpack 5. The event was once again attended by Nolan Bushnell, who was even more impressed by what he saw, and once again made an offer to the young inventor. However, this time Bushnell wanted to purchase more than just Aaron Fechter's animatronics, as he offered to buy his entire company as well, but Fechter still had no interest in selling. Now, as an important side note, at some point Bushnell had spoken of Aaron Fechter's animatronics to Bob Brock, but allegedly he downplayed their quality as cheap and subpar. So fast forward to 1979, as with Bob Brock's first Chuck E. Cheese restaurant only months away from opening, he flew to Orlando to meet with the young inventor for himself out of curiosity. Brock was then given a tour of creative engineering and was blown away by the quality of Fechter's mechanical figures, expressing his opinion that they were far superior to the Pizza Time Theater animatronics. In fact, he had actually been fairly critical of the ones used by Chuck E. Cheese, and had expressed this to Nolan Bushnell when the two were negotiating. However, while Brock was assured they would dramatically improve going forward, even as his first restaurant was about to open, this had yet to happen and was growing concerned. So ultimately, Bob Brock decided Aaron Fechter's animatronics were the future of pizza parlor stage show dining, and the two set forth to create their own franchise, Showbiz Pizza Place.
I bet that pizza tastes good.
You've never seen a place like Showbiz Pizza Place. We'll serve you a pizza second to none. So come for pizza, stay for the fun.
The very first Showbiz Pizza Place opened its doors in Kansas City in March of 1980, and was actually the location that was supposed to be his first Chuck E. Cheese restaurant. However, at the last minute, he decided to make it the pilot store for his new venture, which is why it featured some rather suspicious-looking Chuck E. Cheese-related set decorations. But the spur-of-the-moment decision also unintentionally led to the restaurant's iconic characters and mascot. You see, while the plan was to create a host of brand new characters for Showbiz Pizza Place, the decision to utilize his Chuck E. Cheese location meant time was of the essence. So for the first location, Bob Brock chose to just go with whatever Aaron Fechter's company already had on hand, which as fate would have it was the Wolfpack 5. But to make it at least somewhat unique, they made a few minor alterations to the show tapes and character designs. However, these short-term animatronic characters wound up being very popular, so the group would stay on as the foundation for future locations. This was the same case for the restaurant's mascot Billy Bob, as he was just a slightly redesigned character from the totally not a knockoff of Country Bear Jamboree, Bear Country Jubilee. Although it is worth mentioning that initially he was only a walk-around character, and not actually part of the stage show. The second Showbiz Pizza Place opened for business in August of 1980, and this was the one that solidified the restaurant into American pop culture with the Rock-afire explosion. The show now officially featured Billy Bob and his pal Looney Bird, Mitzi Mozzarella, Duke LaRue and Fats Geronimo, Beach Bear, along with Rolf de Rolf and Earl Schmurl.
We've got singing fun at Showbiz, eating fun at Showbiz, electronic fun at Showbiz, Showbiz Pizza Place. We've got big kids fun at Showbiz, little kids fun at Showbiz, family fun at Showbiz, Showbiz Pizza Place. Share the fun, come on and share the fun at Showbiz Pizza Place.
Now at this point you're probably wondering, okay, so what happened to Bob Brock and Nolan Bushnell's massive Chuck E. Cheese expansion deal? Well, shortly after meeting Aaron Fechter, Nolan Bushnell received a call from Bob Brock who demanded to be let out of his contract. When Bushnell refused, Brock decided to go ahead and start up Showbiz Pizza anyway. This led to a lawsuit from Chuck E. Cheese on the grounds of breach of contract and theft of trade secrets. Showbiz Pizza then filed a countersuit on the grounds of misrepresentation, claiming they were misled into believing that outside of the Disney parks, Chuck E. Cheese had the only suitable animatronic system. And thus the pizza parlor battle officially began, with both franchises constantly trying to one-up the other. In some cases, Pizza Time Theater and Showbiz Pizza purposely built new locations right next door to each other, forcing families to side with either Chuck E. Cheese and the Pizza Time players or Billy Bob and the Rock-afire Explosion.
The elements here at Showbiz Pizza are very similar to Pizza Time. Video games, kiddie rides, mechanical stage shows, and pizza. The big difference is in the sophistication of the animated figures. The movements are more lifelike and the songs aimed at a more adult audience. I really enjoyed the musical arrangements of Showbiz Pizza's Rock-afire Explosion and was captivated by the choreography. This is a slick performance by any standard.
While the lawsuit resumed in the background, additional Showbiz Pizza restaurants began popping up all over the country, and the production of animatronic Rock-afire shows also began to skyrocket. The technology behind the mechanical figures was also improved, which led to an average